The desert had a way of swallowing sound, swallowing hope, swallowing people who strayed too far from the beaten path. Clara Reeves felt all three closing around her as she stumbled across the burning sands of the Arizona Territory, her skirts torn by mesquite thorns and her breath scraping the inside of her throat like sandpaper. Behind her, the wind carried the faint whisper of horses somewhere far off, too far to see, but close enough to haunt her steps. Every gust seemed to breathe the same name. She feared above all others Kohana, the untamable chief of the Red, Mesa. Some frontiersmen swore he was born of lightning and raised by the wild spirits of the canyon. Others whispered that he could track a man across stone, reading the faintest scuff like scripture. Clara didn't know what was myth and what was truth, but she knew he was real, and she knew he was coming. She had escaped him. No escaped his people. Yet when she closed her eyes, she saw him most of all. The raid came at dawn, when the desert was cold and the sky wore that pale shade of morning blue. Clara had been gathering water from the creek near her family's wagon when the Apache warriors swept in with the silence of hawks, their faces painted in the colors of war. Someone shouted, someone fired a weapon, and then the world turned into smoke and terror. Horses screamed. Gunshots cracked. Her father fell. Her mother hid her younger brother beneath the wagon, but Clara had been seized, not roughly, not cruelly, just decisively. Like she was a prize someone had been waiting to collect. She remembered the moment the warriors dragged her before the one who commanded them. Sitting tall on a painted Mustang, shoulders broad as a canyon wall, braids falling over his chest like dark rivers, the chief had looked at her with a stillness that made her heart stop. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Every warrior moved at the slightest gesture of his hand, and his eyes. They weren't cold. They weren't cruel. They were watching like he was trying to understand something silently burning inside her. Clara had hated that look, and feared it, and somehow felt seen by it. When they brought her to the Apache camp at Red Mesa, some warriors wanted her killed. Revenge for the settlers who'd taken their lands, their families, their peace. But Kohana had stepped between her and their blades like the mountain steps between storm and valley. She did not understand why. She only knew she owed him her life. Yet life wasn't the same as freedom. On her second night in the camp, when the drums quieted and the fires dwindled to embers, Clara made her escape. She cut a slit in the back of the hide lodge, crawled out like a rattler fleeing sunlight, and ran until her lungs burned. She didn't look back. She didn't dare. Now, hours later, her legs wobbled beneath her as she reached the edge of a dry wash. The land stretched out before her like a punishment, an endless expanse of sand, scrub, and shimmering heat. Her shadow looked like a ghost clinging to her heels, and Clara wondered if she would die out here, alone and forgotten. But dying alone still seemed better than being captured again. She slid down the wash, boots skidding on crumbling sandstone. Her canteen was nearly empty. The sun hammered down from a sky too big for any one person to survive under. Clara wiped sweat from her brow and forced herself forward, breathing in ragged gasps. "You will not break," she whispered to herself. "Not here." Her voice sounded small, hollow, like someone else's voice. Hours slipped by. The desert heat kept rising, thick as molten metal. Clara stumbled, caught herself, stumbled again. She saw distant shapes wavering on the horizon, tall, dark, shifting. Saguaro cacti, maybe. Or riders. She blinked hard. The vision dissolved, and she nearly fell to her knees. She clutched the strap of her canteen and whispered a prayer she hadn't said since she was a little girl. "Lord, just keep me alive long enough to find help." But the Lord didn't answer. Only the wind did. It carried a distant thrum-soft, rhythmic, unmistakable. HOOFBEATS. Clara froze. Her heart launched into a frantic sprint even though her body could barely move. She turned her head toward the sound, eyes squinting against the glare. There, a small cloud of dust far behind her. Rising, growing, following. No, she breathed. No, no, no. She forced her legs into motion, but each step felt like wading through deep river mud. Her breath came in painful bursts, and black spots danced at the edges of her vision. Still, she ran. She ran like the shadow of death was chasing her, because it was. But another shadow followed too. When she didn't understand Dot as the hoofbeats grew louder, Clara imagined Kohana's eyes again, the way he'd watched her in the camp. Not with hunger. Not with anger, Dot with. Promise, Dot, a promise she didn't know how to name. Nearby, a buzzard circled overhead, its wings cutting lazy patterns into the sky. Clara gritted her teeth. She refused to become carrion for any creature. If Kohana caught her, if his warriors dragged her back, she would fight. She would not let herself be swallowed whole by a life she did not choose. Her foot caught on a root, and she pitched forward with a cry. Sand burned her palms. A sharp stone tore open her knee. Tears stung her eyes not from pain, but from the crushing weight of hopelessness. I can't, she whispered, but she pushed her knees beneath her and rose again. The hoofbeats slowed, drew closer, then stopped. Silence fell, a silence so deep it felt like the earth was holding its breath. Clara turned her head slowly, dread clenching her heart. A single rider sat atop a painted Mustang at the crest of the wash. The sun behind him turned his silhouette into something mythic. Broad shoulders, straight spine, braids stirring in the wind. Even from that distance, she knew him, Kohana, the untamable chief, the man she had fled. He didn't raise his weapon. He didn't move at all. He simply watched her, just as he had the first day, just as he had in the camp, just as if he had been watching her the entire time she ran. Clara's breath broke. She took a step back, ready to flee again even though her legs trembled. But Kohana lifted one hand, not commanding. A gentle gesture. A plea for her to stop before she killed herself in the desert. His voice carried across the canyon, low and steady. Clara. Just her name. Nothing more. But it hit her like a storm breaking against stone. He had followed her. Not because he wanted to punish her. Not because she belonged to him, but because he had vowed something on the night he first saw her, and he would follow her until his last breath to keep that vow. The desert night didn't fall gently. It dropped fast and hard, like a curtain of ink poured over the world. By the time the last streak of gold faded behind the jagged silhouettes of the red mesa ridges, Clara Reeves had already forced her exhausted body into another stretch of desperate walking. Her legs trembled. Her throat felt stripped raw. But she couldn't rest. Not now. Not when she'd seen Kohana's silhouette on the ridge, watching her like a silent sentinel carved out of the canyon stone itself. She didn't know why he hadn't ridden her down. He could have easily. Kohana was known across the territory for riding like the wind itself had chosen him as its champion. A single click of his tongue, a single tug of the reins, and he would have closed the distance between them like a hawk diving upon its prey, but he didn't. That frightened her more than. If he had charged, she pushed herself onward, climbing out of the dry wash and into a scattered forest of mesquite and juniper. Shadows moved like living things around her, stretching and shrinking with each flicker of moonlight through the clouded sky. Somewhere far behind her, a coyote let out a thin, lonely cry. The sound sent a shiver through her spine. She clutched her empty canteen. Just keep going, she whispered to herself, yet she didn't know where she was going. The trading post was somewhere to the east, or at least she prayed it was. Her father had always said it stood near a fork in the riverbed, but in the dark everything looked like the same crooked maze of stone and brush. Her breath quickened when she heard it again. A soft sound. Barely there. A hoof brushing against loose gravel. She froze, heart pounding in her ears. She turned slowly, expecting to see a shadow moving among the trees. Nothing. Just night. Just silence. But Clara had grown up on the frontier. She knew the difference between silence and someone trying to make you believe there's silence. Kohana? She breathed, hating the way the name trembled in her throat. He was following her. But not hunting her. Not chasing. Tracking. Protecting. She didn't want to believe that. She wanted to hold on to fear. It was safer, clearer, easier. Fear kept her mind sharp. Fear kept her alive. But even fear couldn't erase the memory of the night in the Apache camp when he had stepped in front of 3 warriors whose blades were raised above her. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't fought them. He'd simply looked at them, just looked, and they lowered their weapons. Something in his silence commanded more loyalty than any war cry could. And now that silence rode behind her in the dark, hours slipped by. The moon rose higher, silvering the desert with a pale, haunting glow. Clara's steps slowed. Every bone in her body felt hollowed out, scraped clean by exhaustion. Her vision blurred. Twice she stumbled into thorn bushes, scraping her arms. The night air chilled her sweat, and she began to shiver uncontrollably. Her legs finally gave out on a bed of soft earth near a cluster of looming boulders. She pressed her back against one rock, hugging her knees to her chest. She tried to stay awake. She failed. Sleep crept in like a thief, stealing consciousness from her fingertips inward. She drifted into a half-dream state, hearing things she wasn't sure were real. The soft crunch of footsteps. The faint snort of a horse. A low voice speaking in Apache, calm, quiet, almost soothing. Hours later, maybe minutes, Clara jolted awake, heart slamming against her ribs. She gasped, expecting to see Kohana standing over her, but the clearing was empty. Empty. Except for something impossible. Her canteen lay beside her full. Filled to the brim, cold as mountain spring water. Her breath hitched. She stared at it, then scanned the shadows around her. Kohana. She whispered again, softer this time. Not in fear. In disbelief. He had been here. He had come close enough to touch her, but he didn't take her back. He didn't bind her hands. He didn't even wake her. He had only given her water and vanished into the night. Like a ghost, she lifted the canteen to her lips and drank greedily. The water tasted clean, too clean to be from any stagnant pool. He must have ridden miles to find it. For her, a warmth spread through her chest, not from the water, but from the truth she was beginning to understand. He wasn't letting her die. He was making sure she lived. Clara didn't know whether to be angry, grateful, or frightened in a new way she had no name for. By sunrise, she reached the abandoned trading post. Its adobe walls had cracked from years of neglect, and its wooden roof sagged like an old man's shoulders. But it was shelter, and Clara thanked heaven for it. She slipped inside and found the place dusty but quiet. No beds, no food, but shade from the brutal sun. She sank onto the floor, leaning against a wall as a cool breeze drifted through a broken window. She almost felt safe. Almost. A soft thud came from outside, too heavy to be a bird. Clara sprang to her feet and grabbed a broken wooden beam like a club. Her breath quickened as she tiptoed toward the doorway, heart beating against her ribs like a frantic drum. She peered outside. Nothing, only desert. Then a shadow moved behind the far corner of the building. Clara pressed herself back against the wall, pulse thundering. She tightened her grip on the makeshift club. The shadow swayed, waited, watched her. Clara forced herself to step out, 1 foot at a time, her voice trembling. I know you're there. Silence. Then a faint rustle. A shape stepped forward. A wild mule deer. Big-eyed and skittish. Clara exhaled so sharply she nearly collapsed. But the relief didn't last, because behind the deer, half hidden in the brush, she saw the outline of another animal. A horse, a painted Mustang. Kohana's Mustang. Clara's breath caught. He was here. He had been here the whole time. And then she noticed something else. Something small outside the trading post door. A bundle wrapped in tanned hide. Cautiously, she approached. Inside she found strips of dried meat, a handful of cactus fruit, and a small clay pot containing something that looked like crushed herbs. A gift. Food. Medicine. Kohana had left them. Not close enough to frighten her, but close enough to save her. Clara sank to her knees. Her throat tightened in an ache she hadn't felt in years, not fear, not pain, but a stirring. Something gentle and confusing blooming quietly in the place where she had tried to keep her heart frozen. She lifted one strip of dried meat and whispered into the empty air, "Why are you doing this?" But she already knew he was following her, guarding her, not as a captor follows a runaway, but as a man follows the woman whose life he has claimed the duty to protect, a hunter's patience, a warrior's restraint, a guardian's silent vow. Kohana didn't want her as a prisoner. He wanted her safe. He was the shadow she feared, and the shadow that kept her alive. As Clara ate, feeling strength crawl back into her limbs, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. No matter how far she ran, no matter how hard she tried to escape her fate, Kohana would follow her until his last breath. But the truth she dared not face was this: part of her no longer wanted him to stop. The sun was already sinking behind the jagged horizon when Clara Reeves finally saw the faint outlines of a frontier town shimmer into view. A scatter of low wooden buildings clinging stubbornly to the edge of the desert like a last hope refusing to die. Her body ached, her steps dragged, and every breath felt like it scraped her lungs raw. But she didn't stop. Not when safety, real safety, finally glimmered ahead. Her legs nearly gave out as she crossed the dry riverbed and stumbled toward the nearest lantern-lit building. The town wasn't large. A dusty main street ran between a saloon, a half-collapsed stable, and a weather-beaten general store. Lanterns flickered behind windows, casting long shadows that danced across the hard-packed ground. A man stepped out of the saloon, a rifle slung casually over his shoulder. When he saw her, his expression shifted from boredom to alarm. "Miss? You all right?" he called, stepping closer. Clara opened her mouth to speak, but all that came out was a hoarse whisper. "Water. Please." The man rushed forward, catching her by the arm before she collapsed. Within minutes, she was seated inside the saloon with a tin cup pressed into her hands. Cool water. Real water. She drank until her shaking eased. The townsfolk gathered around her, curious, sympathetic, but wary too. Everyone out here had reason to be wary. A woman with silver streaks in her hair placed a gentle hand on Clara's shoulder. "Child, where on earth did you come from?" Clara swallowed hard. "Red Mesa. I escaped the Apache." A hush fell over the room. Even the piano player in the corner froze mid-note. The man with the rifle stepped forward. "You escaped their camp alone?" She nodded. He muttered a curse under his breath. "If you ran from them, then they're coming." The room tensed. Boots scuffed. Hands drifted toward holsters. Clara's heart pounded. Not from fear of the townsfolk, but from what she knew was coming down the trail behind her. Kohana, the untamable chief, the man whose shadow had followed her through the desert. Like a silent oath, she prayed he would turn back now that she'd reached the settlement. But she knew better. Within the hour, the town barricaded the main gate with wagons and boards. Men stood watch on rooftops. Women gathered their children indoors. Lanterns were doused to keep from drawing attention. Clara sat inside the sheriff's small office. her hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee. The sheriff, a broad-shouldered man with a beard like weathered oak bark, watched her carefully. "You say they didn't harm you," he said slowly. "No," Clara murmured. "Just kept me. Then why run?" She looked down at her cup. "Because I didn't belong there." The sheriff sighed. "Well, miss, whatever comes, we'll do our best to keep this place safe." Clara nodded, but unease twisted in her stomach. She didn't want bloodshed, not for her, not for anyone, and certainly not for him. Night deepened. The town grew quiet, every window dark, every door barred. Outside, the desert stretched wide and black, a great sleeping beast lying in wait. Clara tried to sleep on the sheriff's cot, but her mind refused to quiet. She kept remembering the canteen filled with fresh water, the food bundle left at the trading post, the way Kahana had stood on the ridge, watching but not advancing. He had every opportunity to reclaim her, yet he hadn't, protecting her from wolves, guarding her from bandits, keeping her alive in the desert she nearly died crossing. None of it made sense if the Apache chief saw her as a prisoner. So why? Why follow her? Why watch her with those dark, unreadable eyes? A sudden knock jolted her from her thoughts. The sheriff burst in, breathless. "Miss Reeves, you'd best come see this." Clara followed him to the edge of the barricaded Main Street. A lantern burned low, revealing the tense faces of armed townsmen lined up behind cover. The sheriff pointed toward the darkness. "Beyond. There," he whispered. "Clara's." Breath caught. A figure stood. Just past the reach of moonlight, a man tall and unmoving, as still as a carved statue. His braids caught the faint gleam of silver starlight. His Mustang stood behind him, calm and silent. Kohan. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't attacking. He hadn't brought warriors with him. He had come alone. A murmur rippled through the townsmen. "Is that him?" One whispered, "The Apache chief? Why's he standing there like that? Is he trying to spook us?" Clara stepped forward despite the sheriff's restraining hand. Kohana's gaze lifted, finding her instantly in the shadows. Her breath left her in a single, crushing exhale. Something passed between them, something she couldn't name, couldn't deny. A quiet that felt like truth waiting to be spoken. The sheriff hissed, "Stay back, miss. He's dangerous." Clara shook her head. "No. If he meant to kill us, you'd all be dead already." The men exchanged uneasy looks. Clara took another step forward. Kahana lifted one hand slowly, gently as if telling her not to come closer than she needed. Not because he feared her, but because he feared what the others might do to her. Her throat tightened. He wasn't here to take her back. He wasn't here to threaten the town. He was here for her. Why? She whispered into the night. As if hearing the question. Kohana finally spoke. His voice carried across the quiet street. Deep and steady. "I gave my word." Clara shivered. "My people wanted you dead," he continued. "Many times, but I did not allow it." She swallowed hard. "Why?" He pressed a hand to his chest, where a hunter marks a vow. "Because you did nothing to earn death. And I—" He hesitated. Kohana, the man who never hesitated. "I could not let you go alone into the desert." Her knees nearly buckled. The sheriff raised his rifle. "That's close enough, Chief." Kohana didn't flinch. His eyes stayed on Clara. "When you ran, I followed to keep you alive, not to return you." A pause. "I wanted you safe." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Everything she'd feared, everything she'd believed, unraveled in the quiet spaces between his words. She had run from a captor, but she had been fleeing her protector, Kohana. She whispered, her voice cracking. He shook his head. "Do not fear me, Clara Reeves." But she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him. She was afraid of how her heart beat. When he said her name, the townsmen murmured nervously. One wrong move and someone would fire. One spark and the whole fragile moment would shatter into bloodshed. Clara took a breath so deep it hurt. "Kohana," she said softly, You shouldn't be here. They think you came to bring war." Kohana's jaw tightened. "I came because you are alone, and because I gave my life to protect yours." Not a phrase of possession, not a claim. A vow, one he meant with every heartbeat in his chest. Clara felt tears gather at the corners of her eyes. No words reached her tongue. For the first time since she'd escaped the Apache camp, she realized the truth she had been running from. She had never been afraid of Kohana. She had only been afraid of what he meant to her, a man who risked everything for her, a man who chose mercy over war, a man whose silence spoke more than any vow she had ever heard. And in that moment, beneath the quiet stars of the frontier, Clara Reeves knew she could no longer pretend her heart didn't reach for the untamable chief. The desert wind held its breath as the standoff stretched across the silent street. Kohana stood like a carved monument at the town's edge, unmoving, unshakable, a lone warrior facing down an entire settlement without raising so much as a blade. The townsmen waited behind their barricades, fingers trembling on rifle triggers, breaths shallow with fear. The sheriff kept his stance firm, though Clara could see the tension in his jaw, and at the center of it all stood Clara Reeves, her heart pounding so loudly she wondered how no one else could hear it. She looked from the armed men to the solitary Apache chief who had crossed the desert alone, not as a captor, not as a raider, but as a man who had made a promise and was willing to give his life to keep it. "Kohana," she whispered again, the sound shaking loose from her chest like a confession. His eyes softened, just barely, just enough for her to see that the sheriff raised a hand, warning her back. "Miss Reeves, you don't know what this man wants." Clara lifted her chin. "I know exactly what he wants." The sheriff frowned. "And what's that?" She stepped out from the shadows of the sheriff's office into the open street. Lantern light brushed her face, revealing her exhaustion, her bruised skin, her trembling but unbroken will. "He wants to keep me alive." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. Kohana's jaw tightened, not with anger, but with something closer to relief. A quiet acknowledgement that at last she saw him clearly. But the sheriff wasn't convinced. Even if that's true, he's still Apache. This might be a trap. No. Clara shook her head. He came alone. Maybe he's the scout for a larger warband. Kohana didn't react to the accusation, but Clara saw the faint twitch of his fingers, the smallest sign of emotion from a man who rarely showed it. She turned to the sheriff. "If he wanted this town burned to the ground, none of us would be talking right now." Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. But true. Clara took another step forward. "Let me speak to him." The sheriff grabbed her arm. "Miss Reeves," she pulled free, not harshly, but with a quiet resolve that no one in the room could mistake for fear. "I'm not asking," she said. "I'm telling you." The sheriff hesitated, then slowly lowered his hand. Clara walked into the middle of the street. Moonlight washed over her, painting her in silver as if the night itself was watching with held breath. Kohana didn't move, didn't blink, didn't reach for a weapon. His stillness was more striking than any display of force. Clara stopped a few paces, away close enough to see the dust on his shoulders, the wear of the long ride and the sole set of footprints behind him. "You shouldn't have followed me here," she whispered. His voice was soft, almost lost to the wind. "I follow because I must." "Why?" She tried to keep her voice steady even though her heart quaked with every breath. Kohana stepped forward, just one slow, cautious step. "Because when you ran into the night, you took something of mine with you." Her breath caught. "What?" He touched his chest again. "That vow mark. That place where warriors claimed what mattered most. My word. My honor. My breath. The world seemed to tilt beneath her. I swore that no harm would touch you while I still breathe. That vow does not end at the border of my land. Clara swallowed hard. But I don't belong with the Apache. I don't belong anywhere near your people. A long silence followed, the kind that made the desert itself lean in to listen. When Kohana finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet ache she had never heard from him. You belonged in my protection. That was enough. Her eyes stung. She turned away, unable to hold his gaze. Her hands shook by her sides. You don't understand, she said, fighting the storm rising inside her. I ran because I was scared. Yes, his voice was low, steady. Scared of me. She shook her head. Not of you? That made him pause. Then why? Clara met his eyes, the eyes she had tried to forget across miles of brutal desert. Because I didn't know what you were to me. His breath slowed. His shoulders lifted slightly as though something sharp had cut into him. Clara took a step closer. When you saved me, when you protected me, I didn't know why. I thought you wanted to keep me, own me, hold me like a prisoner of war. Kohana's brows drew together, faintly, with a kind of sorrow she had never thought she'd see in him. I never wanted chains on you, he said. Only breath in your chest. Her throat tightened. I didn't understand that. Not until the desert. Not until you left water in my hands while I slept. Kohana didn't speak, but the flicker in his eyes said enough. The townsmen shifted behind the barricade, uncomfortable witnesses to something much larger than they expected. Clara took another step, and now, I don't know what frightens me more, she said quietly. The thought of you leaving, she swallowed, or the thought of you staying. Kohana's breath caught, just a little, just enough for her to see the truth inside him tremble. Clara. He murmured. Then a shout shattered the fragile stillness. He ain't leaving alive. A rifle cocked. A shot fired. Clara gasped as the bullet whistled through the air, and Kohana moved, not toward the townsmen, not toward violence. He moved for her. In a heartbeat he threw himself between her and the gunfire, his body shielding hers. The bullet struck the dirt at his feet, sending up a spray of dust. The sheriff roared, "Hold your fire." Chaos erupted, but Clara didn't hear it. All she felt was Kohana's hands gripping her shoulders, steadying her as if her safety mattered more than his life. You would die for me? She whispered, voice trembling. He didn't blink, didn't hesitate. Before I let the world take you from me. Her breath broke into a sob she couldn't contain. In that moment, raw, dangerous, trembling with truth, Clara Reeves finally understood. The Apache chief had not come to reclaim a prisoner. He had come because his heart had already crossed the desert for her. The sheriff shoved between his men, fury etched across his face. The next man who fires without my say loses his gun arm. You hear me? The townsmen lowered their rifles reluctantly, shame creeping onto more than a few faces. One man muttered an apology into his boots. Kohana stayed in front of Clara until every weapon was lowered. Only then did he step back slowly, cautiously, like a man who refused to turn his back on danger until he knew she was safe. Clara touched his arm. Kohana, she whispered, I don't want you to die for me. He met her gaze with a quiet flame burning in his. I will not die, he said. Not while I still have something to protect. Her heart ached with a plea she didn't know how to speak. I don't want you to leave, she confessed. Not tonight. Shock flickered through the sheriff's eyes. Disbelief rippled through the townsmen. But Clara didn't care. Kohana's breath deepened. Hope, gentle and unguarded, touched his expression for the first time. Then I stay, he said softly. For as long as you ask. And the truth that had chased them both across the desert finally broke free between them. Clara Reeves did not want rescue from the untamable Apache chief. She wanted him. Dawn broke over the canyon in a slow wash of copper light, the kind that crawled across the rocks like a living thing, brushing the world awake without mercy. Clara Reeves felt the cold night loosening its fingers from her skin as she lay half-conscious on a bed of sand and stone. The sharp sting in her shoulder reminded her she had been shot, and every heartbeat pulsed like a hammer striking the wound. She tried to move, but her breath caught like a bird trapped in her chest. She did not yet know where she was or how far they had come, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Kohana was still alive. She could feel his presence even before she opened her eyes, the same way she could sense the steady heat of a fire before seeing the flames. Some people spoke with their voices. Kohana spoke with the warmth that wrapped itself around her soul. When she finally forced her eyes open, she saw him kneeling a short distance away, his broad back rising and falling in slow breaths. His skin, darkened by a lifetime under the sun, was streaked with dried blood that was too red not to be his own. His braids had come loose, and one hung over his shoulder like a torn banner. He had carried her through the night. She knew it not by memory, but by the agony etched into every line of his body. He had not slept. He had not stopped. He had done what he promised long before she ever understood his heart. He had followed her until his last breath, or close enough that heaven itself must have paused to see if he would cross the threshold. Kohana sensed her waking and turned to her with that quiet stillness she had come to know so well. He said no words at first. Instead, he studied her face as though carving it into memory in case fate pulled him away before the sun set. Clara tried to speak, but her throat felt raw and thirsty. He reached for a small gourd beside him and lifted it to her lips. The water tasted faintly of stone and wind, but it breathed life back into her. His hands were trembling when he set the gourd down. It was the first time she had ever seen him shaken. "You are safe now," he said softly, though his voice was rough like broken cedar bark. "The men from the town will not follow us here." She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt a weight settle in her chest. "You're hurt," she managed. "You're bleeding." He shook his head as though his wounds mattered as little as dust on his boots. "It will pass." But Clara could see the truth. His right side was wrapped in torn cloth, stained nearly black. Another cut ran along his ribs where a bullet had grazed him. The night had taken more from him than she wished to imagine. He had risked everything for her, not because she was helpless, not because he owed her anything, but because the bond between them had grown deeper than words could shape. She reached out with trembling fingers and touched his hand. His rough, calloused palm closed around hers with a gentleness that no warrior should have been capable of. She wondered how long he could keep giving pieces of himself to keep her alive. Kohana lifted her carefully into a sitting position, supporting her with an arm around her back. She felt the heat of his body and the strain in his muscles as he fought through pain he refused to speak of. The canyon around them was tall and narrow, a hidden pathway carved by centuries of wind and water. Few settlers knew it existed. Even fewer Apache passed through it. It was a place forgotten by war and untouched by the bitterness of men. The silence held no threats. The shadows held no rifles. For the first time since the night she was taken captive, Clara felt the world loosen its claws. She looked at him with a mix of sorrow and awe. "Why do you keep risking your life for me?" she whispered. "You could have left me in the town. You could have let them take you. You could have run." Kohana's eyes lifted to the sky as if he needed its vastness to hold what he was about to say. "A warrior can run from an army," he said slowly, "but not from the one person his spirit chooses." He touched her cheek with a knuckle roughened by years of survival. "You think I followed you because of a duty I did not ask for. But I followed you because my heart knows no other path." She felt the words sink into her like warm rain. No man had ever spoken to her in such a way, with honesty sharp enough to cut and tender enough to heal. She wanted to tell him she felt the same, that somewhere along the broken trail she had stopped fearing him and started fearing a world without him. But pain clouded her mind again, and she swayed. Kohana steadied her and lowered her back to the ground with care. He rose slowly, every movement stiff, and scanned the canyon with the instinct of someone who had survived more battles than most men ever imagined. Satisfied with the safety of the place, he began to build a small fire from branches he collected near the canyon's mouth. Clara watched him, noticing how his steps faltered, how he winced when he thought she was not looking. He was breaking himself piece by piece to protect her. She would not allow him to shatter entirely. When he returned to her side, she caught his wrist. "You need rest," she said. "Lie down." He shook his head, stubborn as stone. "I must watch the trail." "No one is coming," she insisted, her voice stronger than her body. "You brought me here because it is hidden. Then trust it. Trust me." She tugged gently, and for the first time since she had met him, Kohana allowed someone else's will to guide him. He lowered himself beside her with the weight of a man, carrying more burdens than his shoulders were built for. Clara gently placed his head on her lap. It surprised him. He blinked as though unsure if he was allowed such softness. She brushed a loose strand of hair from his face. His breathing slowed. For a man who survived storms and wars, he seemed unprepared for tenderness. Hours passed in a slow dance of light and shadow as the sun drifted across the canyon. Kohana slept with one arm curled around her as though even unconscious he feared she might slip away. Clara held him, marveling at the strange beauty of it all. Two souls from opposite worlds, bound by a love that neither expected nor wanted at first, now entwined like roots beneath desert soil. When evening approached, Kohana stirred. He sat up, his gaze distant for a moment before settling on her. She knew that look. He was thinking of what came next, of how two people from warring worlds could walk the same road. She reached for his hand and squeezed it. "We don't have to go back," she said quietly. "Not to the town. Not to your tribe. Not to anywhere that wants to own us." She nodded toward the deep heart of the canyon, where faint traces of green hinted at water and life. "There are places no one claims. Places where a man and woman can build something of their own." Kohana studied her with an expression halfway between disbelief and longing. "You would leave your people," he asked, "and live with a man they fear?" She smiled gently. "I would choose the man who saved me again and again. The man who followed me through the dark when no one else would. The man who gave me his heart before he ever spoke a word of love." Silence fell over them, but it was not empty. It was full of the promise of a new beginning. Kohana stood and offered her his hand. She took it, rising slowly, her body aching but her spirit light. Together they walked deeper into the canyon. The path was narrow and winding, but it opened into a valley hidden from the world, where grass swayed like a green ocean and a river carved its way through soft earth. A place untouched by hate. A place waiting for them. Kohana turned to her, his dark eyes warmed by the fading sun. "This will be our home," he said. "A place where no one hunts us. A place where our love is not a crime." Clara stepped into his arms, feeling the steady beat of his heart. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe. Not because he would die for her, though she knew he would, but because she would live with him, build with him, love him in a world they shaped with their own hands. As night settled over the valley, they held each other beneath a sky of endless stars. Two souls, once enemies by fate, now bound by a love fierce enough to tame even the wildest corners of the West.